Hello. Good evening, everyone. I thought I would jump on and do another live. It's been a minute. There's been so much going on in life. But yeah, I thought it would be nice to come on and read Second Maccabees. That's what we're here for. So before I get into that, there's been so much going on, obviously, with my coming into the Orthodox Church and being an Orthodox Christian now, which is such a blessing. And obviously, I'm trying to do what I can to learn. Obviously, we're continuing to learn. My catechist said that the catechism doesn't end in the church. And that is so true. There is so much that just, yeah, my mind is being blown every day, it seems, with all the things that I'm learning, which I'm so, so grateful for. And obviously, the main aim is to put it into practice. So, yeah, that's everything. The channel is doing well beyond what I could have even dreamed, which is amazing. I'm now at the stage where I can be monetized, which is crazy to say. And so I have set a rough, kind of a stupid goal. I literally just put these numbers in, it's bogus, whatever. 20 super chats, and I will do something, whatever you decide will be done, obviously within reason. I'm not going to all of a sudden delete my channel because someone says I should do so because the goal was reached. But your support is so, so appreciated. I just want to share that from the bottom of my heart. Your support is really, really appreciated. And all my clips, all the videos, it's there to be shared. Particularly, I would hope, to Protestants who are seeking, who recognize the errors or the flaws and the holes in their own paradigm, in their own system, and are looking for the true church, which I've said before and I will say again, I truly believe is the Eastern Orthodox Church. So, with all that being said, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining the live. And we're going to jump straight into the promo. Good to see you, Joe Skill. I see you've been on quite a few of my videos. I really, really, really appreciate your support. And yeah, like I said, share it far and wide. Everything that I do on this channel is for you to share. So I really, really appreciate it. Cool. Without further ado, let's get into it. So here's the promo. We're going to be reading through the Deuterocanon in the Orthodox Study Bible, and this is a Bible that I would highly recommend. Not only because it has a Deuterocanon in it, which thankfully is in modern English, so it's easy to follow and to understand, but also because it provides an English translation of the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Hebrew Old Testament. It's this version of the Old Testament that is most quoted by the apostles in the New Testament, so you get access to ancient readings that just aren't present in today's Hebrew version. On top of this, there are loads of extras, including study notes, quotes from various church fathers who give their interpretation of specific passages, numerous articles going into greater depth on key theological aspects, beautiful images of icons depicting the faith, morning and evening prayers, and even a lectionary to follow along with the liturgical cycle of the church. Speaking as someone who comes from a Protestant background and who absolutely loves the scriptures, truly believing them to be the words of God, this Bible is a great Bible to have. The Orthodox Study Bible provides me with an ancient understanding and perspective of scriptures that I've known for years, and I'm always learning something new. If you'd like to get a copy for yourself, I've left a link in the description down below so you know just where to find it. Happy reading. Thank you, Joe Skill. Thank you, Gabriel. Apologies. So I will repeat everything I just said. The super chats, any super chats that come through, I will just answer at the very end of the stream, and we'll just go through each super chat that comes in. And also, we're about to start Second Maccabees. It's been a few months, I think, since I read First Maccabees, and especially from my days as a Protestant, when I was exploring the ancient churches and trying to understand their own scriptures and understand their own understanding of it all. I know Second Maccabees was a key book that came about when it comes to speaking of prayers for the dead and things like that. So that's one of the main reasons why I'm very keen to read this book, and just to see the whole story as it plays out. So finally, Second Maccabees chapter 1, and I'm just going to continue reading. Thank you all for being here. I really, really appreciate your support. The Jewish brothers in Jerusalem and the land of Judea, to their Jewish brothers in Egypt, greetings and good peace. May God do good to you, and may he remember his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, his faithful servants. May he give all of you a heart to worship him, and do his will with a strong heart and willing soul. May he open your heart to his law and his commandments, and may he bring you peace. May he hear your prayers and be reconciled to you, and may he not forsake you in an evil time. We are now praying for you here. In the 169th year in the reign of Demetrius, we Jews wrote to you at the culminating point of the affliction that came upon us. In those years, from the time Jason and his followers revolted against the Holy Land and the kingdom, and burned the gate and shed innocent blood, we prayed to the Lord, and we were heard. So we offered sacrifice and fine flour, lit the lamps, and set out the loaves. Now then, celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles in the months of Chislev, in the 188th year. Those in Jerusalem and in Judea, and the Senate and Judas, to Aristobulus, who is from the family of the anointed priests, and is the teacher of Ptolemy the king, and to the Jews who are in Egypt, greetings and good health. Since we were saved by God from great dangers, we thank him abundantly, as those drawn up in battle order against the king. For he drove out those who fought against the holy city. And when Antiochus, their leader, reached Persia with a force around him that seemed irresistible, they were cut to pieces in the temple of Nanea, through a deception employed by the priests of Nanea. For Antiochus, together with his friends, arrived at the temple to marry her, for the sake of obtaining most of its treasures as a dowry. When the priests of the temple of Nanea set out the treasures, and Antiochus with a few men had come inside the enclosed wall of the sacred precinct, they closed the temple as soon as he entered it. Then they opened the secret door of the ceiling and threw stones. They struck down the governor and his men, dismembered them, and took their heads and threw them to the people outside. Blessed in every way be our God, who delivered up the ungodly men. Since on the 25th day of Chislev, we will celebrate the purification of the temple. Since on the 25th day of Chislev, we will celebrate the purification of the temple, we thought it needful to notify you that you might also celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles and the Feast of the Fire with Nehemiah, who built the temple and the altar, when Nehemiah, who built the temple and the altar, offered sacrifices. For when our fathers were led captive to Persia, the pious priests of that time took some of the fire off the altar and hid it secretly in the hollow of a dry well, where they sealed it, so the place would be unknown to anyone. But after enough years had passed, when it pleased God, Nehemiah was sent away by the king of Persia, and he appointed the descendants of the priests, who hid the fire, to get it. When they reported to us that they had not found the fire, but rather a thick liquid, he commanded them to dip it out and bring it. But when the things of the sacrifices were brought to be offered, Nehemiah told the priests to sprinkle the liquid on the wood and the things laid upon it. When this was done, and some time had elapsed, and the sun, which had been clouded over, shone forth, a great fire flared up, causing everyone to marvel. While the sacrifice was being consumed, the priests and everyone offered prayer. Jonathan led, and all the rest responded, as did Nehemiah. The prayer was offered as follows. O Lord, Lord God, Creator of all things, fearful, mighty, righteous, and merciful, the only King and good one. You only are bountiful, alone, righteous, almighty, and eternal. You saved Israel from every evil, and you chose our fathers and sanctified them. Accept this sacrifice on behalf of all your people Israel, and protect your portion, and sanctify it. Gather our scattered people, free those enslaved among the Gentiles. Look upon the rejected and despised, and make the Gentiles know that you are God. Torment the oppressors, and those insolent with arrogance. Plant your people in your holy place, as Moses said. Then the priests sang hymns, and when the things of the sacrifice were consumed, Nehemiah ordered that the remaining liquid should be poured upon large stones. When this was done, a flame flared up, but when a light from the altar shone in turn, the flame went out. Now when this became known, the matter was reported to the king of the Persians. He was told that in the place where the exiled priests had hidden the fire, the liquid had appeared, from which Nehemiah and his men purified the sacrifice. So the king investigated the matter, enclosed the place, and made it sacred. Then the king exchanged many gifts with those he favored. Nehemiah and his men called this Nephthah, which means purification, but by most people it is called Nephthah. No idea how to pronounce that word. One finds in the records, as it is noted, that Jeremiah the prophet ordered those migrating to take some of the fire. The prophet who gave the law to those migrating, the prophet also gave the law to those migrating, and commanded them not to forget the Lord's ordinances, nor be led astray in their thoughts when they happened to see the gold and silver statues and their adornment. He also spoke other such words, and urged them not to depart from the law in their hearts. It was also written that the prophet received an oracle, and ordered that the tabernacle and the ark should accompany him when he went to the mountain where Moses had gone up, and had seen the inheritance of God. So when Jeremiah went there and found a cave, he brought the tabernacle, the ark, and the altar of incense, and then sealed up the entrance. Some who followed him came to mark the way, but they were unable to find it. Now when Jeremiah learned of this, he rebuked them and said, "The place shall be unknown until God gathers his people again and shows his mercy. Then the Lord will disclose these things, and the glory of the Lord and the cloud will be seen, as they were shown to Moses, and as Solomon deemed it worthy that the place should be specially consecrated. It was also made clear that Solomon in his wisdom offered sacrifice for the consecration and completion of the temple. Just as Moses prayed to the Lord, and fire came down from heaven and consumed the sacrifice, so Solomon also prayed, and the fire came down and consumed the whole burnt offerings. Moses said, "They were consumed because the sin offering had not been eaten." Likewise, Solomon also celebrated the 8 days. The same things were reported in the records and in the memoirs of Nehemiah, and also that he founded a library and gathered books about the kings and the prophets and the writings of David and letters of kings about votive offerings. Likewise, Judas also collected all the books lost on account of the war that came upon us, so they are in our possession. Thus, if you have need of them, send people to bring them to you. Since then, we are about to celebrate the purification. We write to you. Therefore, you will do well to celebrate the days, for it is God who saved all his people and gave back the inheritance to all, and the kingdom, the priesthood, and the consecration, as he promised through the law. For we hope in God that he will have mercy upon us soon and gather us from everywhere under heaven into his holy place. For he delivered us from great evils and has purified this place. Now the account of Judas Maccabeus and his brothers, the purification of the great temple and the consecration of the altar, and moreover the wars against Antiochus Epiphanes and his son Eupator, and the interventions that came from heaven to those who behaved courageously on behalf of Judaism, who, although few in number, plundered the whole country and pursued the barbarian multitudes, and recovered control of the temple, famous throughout the world, freed the city, and restored the laws that were about to be dissolved, while the Lord with great goodness was merciful to them. All this, which was made clear by Jason of Cyrene, in 5 books, we shall attempt to abridge into a single book. We realize that a confused mass of material and subject matter makes it too hard on most people who wish to plunge into the narrative of history. Thus we have aimed to help those who wish to read with delight, to make it easy for those who are inclined to memorize, and to appeal to those who read for profit. Therefore, for us who have undertaken the difficult task of brevity, this is no easy matter, but one demanding sweat and loss of sleep, as is the case with one who prepares a banquet, seeking the benefit of others. All the same, for the sake of the gratitude of many, we will gladly endure the uncomfortable toil, leaving the intricate examination of exact details to the compiler, while devoting our labor to arriving at the outlines of the abridgment. Just as the architect of a new house must be concerned with the whole construction, while the one who decorates it and paints it needs to consider only what is suitable for its adornment, so it seems to me is the case with us. It is fitting for the originator of a history to enter into a thorough discussion of words and be inquisitive about every detail, but one who pursues brevity of narrative must be permitted to forego exhaustive treatment. Therefore, from here on, let us begin our narrative, adding only so much to what has already been said, for it is foolish to lengthen the preface of a history, but cut short the history itself. Seems like a good place to get a quick drink. All right, it's time for the history. When the holy city was inhabited in complete peace, because the laws were very well observed on account of the godliness of the high priest Onias and his hatred of wickedness, it happened that the kings themselves honored the place and glorified the temple with very magnificent gifts. Even Seleucus, the king of Asia, provided revenue at his own expense for all the services of the sacrifices. But a certain Simon from the tribe of Benjamin, who had been made protector of the temple, was at variance with the high priest about the administration of the city market. Thus, when he could not prevail over Onias, he went to Apollonius, son of Tarsus, who at that time was governor of Coelesyria and Phoenicia. He reported to him the untold wealth in the temple treasury at Jerusalem, so much that the funds could not be counted. Furthermore, they did not belong to the account of the sacrifices, and it was possible they could fall under the authority of the king. When Apollonius met the king, he informed him about the money that was disclosed to him. So the king chose Heliodorus, Heliodorus, who was over his affairs, and sent him with orders to remove the aforesaid money. Thus Heliodorus immediately set out on his journey, seemingly to make an inspection of the cities of Coelesyria and Phoenicia, but actually to carry out the king's purpose. When he arrived in Jerusalem and was kindly received by the high priest of the city, he told about the disclosure and why he had come, and inquired whether this was truly the case. The high priest informed him of the deposits belonging to widows and orphans, and also some money of Hyrcanus, son of Tobias, a man held in very high regard, the value of which totaled 400 talents of silver and 200 of gold. All this was contrary to the report of the ungodly Simon. He also told Heliodorus that it was altogether impossible to wrong those who trusted in the holiness of the place and in the dignity and inviolability of the temple, honored throughout all the world. But because of the king's orders, Heliodorus said the money must by all means be taken to the king's treasury. So he set a day to go in and direct the inspection of these funds. There was no little anguish throughout the whole city. The priests prostrated themselves before the altar in their priestly garments and appealed to heaven, to him who gave the law concerning deposits, to keep them safe for those who deposited them. To see the appearance of the high priest was to be wounded at heart, for his face and the change of his color revealed the anguish of his soul. For alarm and a trembling of body had come upon the man, through which the pain in his heart became evident to those who saw him. People also rushed out of their houses in crowds to make a public supplication, because the place was about to be brought into contempt. Women, girded with sackcloth beneath their breasts, amassed in the streets. Some of the virgins who were kept inside ran together to the gates, some to the walls, and others peeked out the windows. All stretched out their hands to heaven and made entreaty. There was something pitiable in the prostrations of the entire populace, and in the anxiety and great anguish of the high priest. So they called upon the Almighty Lord to keep safe and secure what had been entrusted for those who had placed them in trust. But Heliodorus continued with what had been decided. So when he arrived at the treasury with his bodyguard, the Lord of Spirits and all authority was already present. He caused such a great manifestation that all who dared to accompany him were panic-stricken at God's power. They turned about and fled in feebleness and terror. For a certain horse appeared to them, having a fearful rider. It was arrayed with a very beautiful pack saddle, and it rushed furiously at Heliodorus, and struck at him with its front hoofs. He who sat thereon was seen wearing a full armour of gold. 2 other young men also appeared to him, remarkable in bodily strength, very beautiful in grandeur, and illustrious in dress. They stood on each side of him and pummeled him continually, inflicting him with many wounds. Suddenly, Heliodorus fell to the ground, and a deep darkness overcame him. His men then picked him up and put him on a stretcher and carried him away. This man, who had just entered the treasury with a great retinue and all his bodyguard, but now was not able to help himself. So they came to know, and it was clearly proven to be the power of Almighty God. He was speechless because of the divine visitation, being thrown on the ground, deprived of all hope of recovery. The people blessed the Lord, who acted marvelously for his own place. The temple, which a little while earlier had been full of fear and trouble, was now filled with joy and gladness, because the Almighty Lord had appeared. Certain friends of Heliodorus quickly entreated Onias the high priest to call upon the Most High to grant life to him who was lying there, about at his last breath. So the high priest, suspecting the king might think some foul play was perpetrated by the Jews regarding Heliodorus, offered sacrifice for his recovery. While the high priest was making the offering of atonement, the same young men again appeared to Heliodorus, dressed in the same apparel. They stood and said, "Be very grateful to Onias the high priest, for on his account the Lord has granted you your life. Now, since you were punished by heaven, report to all men the majestic power of God." Then, having said this, they became invisible. Wow. It's a communion of the saints right there. Then Heliodorus offered sacrifice to the Lord and made very great vows to him who had spared his life. So after he gladly received Onias, he returned with his forces to the king. Then he bore testimony to all men about the deeds of the great God, which he had seen with his own eyes. When the king asked Heliodorus what kind of man would be suitable to send on another journey to Jerusalem, he replied, "If you have an enemy or plotter against you, send him there, for you will receive him back thoroughly punished, if he should escape at all. For truly there is some power of God about that place. For he who has his dwelling in heaven watches over that place and aids it, and destroys those who come to do it harm." So this was how things turned out concerning Heliodorus and the preservation of the treasury. Wow. Just take another drink break. Cool. All right, chapter 4. The previously mentioned Simon, who informed about the money and his homeland, spoke evil things against Onias, claiming it was Onias himself who terrified Heliodorus and created the calamity. Simon dared to say that Onias, the man who was the benefactor of the city, the protector of his fellow countrymen, and a zealot for the laws, plotted the whole matter. But when Simon's hatred progressed to the point that even murders were committed by those he approved, Onias realized the danger of Simon's love of strife, and that Apollonius, son of Menethius and governor of Coele-Syria and Phoenicia, was even intensifying Simon's malice. So he went to the king, not to accuse his fellow citizens, but to look out for the common good, both public and private.
for he saw that without the king's attention, matters could not reach a peaceful settlement, and that Simon would not cease from his fury. When Seleucus died, and Antiochus, also called Epiphanes, succeeded to the kingdom, Jason, the brother of Onias, obtained the high priesthood by corruption. For through a petition, he promised the king 360 talents of silver, and then another source of revenue, and from another source of revenue, 80 talents. In addition to this, he promised to pay 150 more if the king gave permission to establish a gymnasium as a place for training young men and for enrolling the men of Jerusalem as citizens of Antioch. When the king assented and Jason seized the high priesthood, he at once changed his countrymen over to the Greek way of life. He set aside the royal benefits to the Jews brought about through John, the father of Eupolemus, the ambassador who established friendship and alliance with the Romans. He also renounced and destroyed conformity to the laws and created a new civic life contrary to the customs. For he eagerly founded a gymnasium under the citadel itself and persuaded the most noble of the young men to wear the Greek cap. So there was the fullest expression of Hellenization and the adoption of foreign customs because of the surpassing wickedness of Jason, who was ungodly and not a true high priest. Therefore, the priests were no longer eager to serve at the altar, but they despised the temple and neglected the sacrifices. Instead, they hastened to take part in the unlawful proceedings in the wrestling school after the invitation to the discus. They counted the honors of their fathers as nothing, but regarded Greek honors as the best. For this reason, difficult circumstances overtook them, and those whose way of life they admired, and wished altogether to assimilate because their enemies had and punished. For this reason, difficult circumstances overtook them, and those whose way of life they admired and wished altogether to assimilate became their enemies and punished them. For to act in an ungodly way against the divine laws is no light thing, but the following events will make this clear. When the quadrennial, never seen this word in my life, when the quadrennial games were being held at Tyre, and the king was present, the vile Jason sent ambassadors, since they were Antiochian citizens from Jerusalem, to carry 300 silver drachmas for a sacrifice to Hercules. Those who carried the money, however, considered it inappropriate and best not to use the money for sacrifice, but to expend it for another purpose. So this money, intended by the sender for the sacrifice to Hercules, was by the decision of those who carried it, applied to the construction of battleships. When Apollonius, the son of Menethius, was sent to Egypt to share in the festal proclamation of King Philometor, and Antiochus learned that Philometor had become hostile to his government. So he was concerned for his own safety. Therefore, after he reached Joppa, he went on to Jerusalem. He was magnificently received by Jason and the city. He was magnificently received by Jason and the city, being ushered in with torches and shouts. Then he encamped in Phoenicia. Then, after a period of 3 years, Jason sent Then after a period of 3 years, Jason sent Menelaus, son of the previously mentioned Simon, to carry the money to the king and to complete the records of necessary business. But when he was commended to the king, Menelaus honored him with an appearance of authority and obtained the high priesthood for himself, outbidding Jason by 300 talents of silver. After he received the king's orders, although in no way worthy of the high priesthood, he returned, carrying the rage and savage cruelty of a tyrant and a wild beast, and having the wrath of a barbarian. Thus, Jason, after he undermined his own brother, was undermined by another, and was driven as a fugitive into the land of the Ammonites. So Menelaus took hold of the high priesthood, but he did not pay regularly any of the money promised to the king. Thus, when Sostratus, the commander of the citadel, kept demanding payment, since the collection of revenue was his responsibility, the two of them were summoned before the king on this account. Menelaus left his own brother Lysimachus as his court official in the high priesthood, while Sostratus left Crates in charge of his Cyprian troops. While these things were taking place, it came about that the cities of Tarsus and Malus revolted. While these things were taking place, it came about that the cities of Tarsus and Malus revolted, because they were given as a gift to Antiochus, the king's concubine. So the king went quickly to put down the rebellion. He left Andronicus, a man highly regarded, to act as his regent. But Menelaus, thinking he had gained a convenient opportunity, pilfered some of the gold vessels from the temple and gave them to Andronicus. As it happened, he had already sold other vessels to Tyre and the neighboring cities. But when Onias found out exactly what had taken place, he condemned these acts after he departed to a safe place at Daphne, located near Antioch. Therefore, Menelaus took Andronicus aside and urged him to kill Onias. Thus, Andronicus went to Onias and persuaded him with deceit. He welcomed him with sworn pledges and gave him his right hand. Although Onias was suspicious, Andronicus persuaded him to come out of his place of sanctuary. Then, with no sense of justice, he immediately put him to death. For this reason, not only the Jews, but also many of the other nations took offense and were angry at the unjust murder of the man. So when the king returned from the region of Cilicia, the Jews in the city pleaded with him regarding the senseless murder of Onias, and the Greeks also felt the common hatred of the crime. Therefore, Antiochus was grieved at heart and filled with pity, and he wept on account of the decency and good behavior of the deceased. Inflamed with anger, he immediately stripped off the purple robe from Andronicus and tore off his garments. Then he led him around the whole city to that very place where he sinned against Onias, and there he put the blood-stained man to death. Thus the Lord repaid him with the punishment he deserved. When much sacrilegious plunder by Lysimachus took place in the city, with the consent of Menelaus, and when the report of this spread abroad, the people gathered together against Lysimachus, because many of the gold vessels had already been carried away. Thus, since the crowds were stirring and completely filled with wrath, Lysimachus armed about 3,000 men and began an unjust attack, led by a certain Oranus, a man advanced in years, but no less advanced in stupidity. So when the Jews became aware of the assault of Lysimachus, Some picked up stones and clubs, and others took handfuls of ashes, lying about, and threw them in utter confusion at Lysimachus and his friends, and his men. As a result, they wounded many of them, killed some, and forced them all to flee. Then they killed the temple robber himself near the treasury. But a judgment concerning this was presented against Menelaus. For when the king arrived at Tyre, 3 men sent by the council of elders presented the case before him. But Menelaus, who was already defeated, promised considerable wealth to Ptolemy, son of Dorymenes, if he won over the king. Therefore Ptolemy took the king aside into a certain courtyard, as if to offer him refreshment, and persuaded him to change his mind. For he indeed acquitted Menelaus, the cause of all the evil, but he sentenced to death those unfortunate men who would have been freed uncondemned, even if they pleaded before the Scythians. So those who had spoken for the city, the people, and the holy vessels quickly suffered the unjust penalty. For this reason, even the Tyrians were indignant over the crime and provided magnificently for their funeral expenses. But Menelaus, because of the covetousness of those in power, remained in office, increased in malice, and brought about great treachery against his fellow citizens. Let me just have another sip. All right. Around this time, Antiochus set out for his second assault into Egypt. So it came about throughout the entire city of Jerusalem that for almost 40 days there were apparitions of horsemen dressed in apparel, interwoven with gold and moving quickly through the air, in companies fully armed with spears and drawn swords. Troops of horsemen set in battle array and making attacks and counterattacks on this side and on that, with the movement of shields and a multitude of spears, and the shooting of arrows, and the brightness of gold ornaments, and breastplates of all sorts. Therefore all the men prayed that the appearance might be for the good. But when a false report was circulated that Antiochus was dead, Jason took no less than 1,000 men and suddenly made an assault upon the city. When the men on the wall were driven off and the city was finally taken, Menelaus was banished into the citadel. But Jason kept slaughtering his own fellow citizens without mercy, not comprehending that success against his kinsman was his very unlucky day, for he imagined that he was winning trophies over his enemies rather than over people of the same race. Yet he did not get the upper hand of the government, but in the end gained disgrace from his plot, and took refuge again among the Ammonites. In the end, his life reached an ugly conclusion. He was accused before Aretas, the ruler of the Arabs, but fled from city to city. He was pursued by all, detested as a rebel against the laws, and abhorred as an executioner of his homeland and fellow citizens. Finally, he was cast ashore in Egypt. Thus, he who so often banished many from their homelands, himself perished in a strange land, for he had set sail to the Lacedaemonians to obtain protection because of their kinship. So he who cast out many without a burial was unmourned, for he had no funeral of his own, nor did he share a place in the tomb of his fathers. When the news of what happened reached King Antiochus, he took it to mean that Judea was in revolt. So inwardly, he became like a wild beast, left Egypt, and took the city in war. He commanded his soldiers to cut down without mercy whomever they met, and to slaughter those who went into their houses. So there was a killing of young and old, a killing of boys, women, and children, and a slaughtering of virgins and infants. 80,000 were destroyed in a total of 3 days, 40,000 in hand-to-hand combat, and no fewer were sold into slavery than were slain. Not satisfied with these things, Antiochus dared to enter the most holy temple in all the earth. He had as his guide Menelaus, who had become a traitor both to the laws and to his country. With defiled hands he took the holy vessels, and with profane hands he pulled down the things dedicated by other kings to increase the glory and honor of the place. Antiochus was haughty, but was unaware that because of the sins of those who lived in the city, the Lord was momentarily angered and therefore was withholding grace as a temporary punishment of the place. However, if the people of the city had not been involved in so many sins, this man would have been scourged and brought to ruin as soon as he had come, as was Heliodorus, whom Seleucus, the king, had sent to inspect the treasury. But the Lord did not choose the nation because of the place, but the place because of the nation. Therefore, the place also itself shared in the misfortunes that befell the nation, and later had a share in its benefits, and what was forsaken in the wrath of the Almighty was restored again in all its glory by the reconciliation of the great Lord. At any rate, Antiochus carried off 1,800 talents from the temple and hurried away to Antioch. In his arrogance, he thought he could sail on the land and walk on the sea because of the lifting up of his heart. But he also left governors to afflict the people. In Jerusalem, he left Philip, a Phrygian by race, more barbarous in character than the one who appointed him, and in Gerizim, Andronicus. In addition to those, he left Menelaus, who lorded it over his fellow citizens worse than did the others, having a hateful disposition towards the Jewish citizens. Antiochus sent Apollonius, commander of the Mysians, with an army of 22,000 men, with orders to slaughter all the grown men and to sell the women and young boys as slaves. After he arrived in Jerusalem and pretended to be peace-loving, this man waited until the holy day of the Sabbath. Then, finding the Jews not at work, he commanded his men to take up arms. He put to the sword all those who came out to see them. Then he rushed into the great city with his armed men and killed great numbers of people. But Judas Maccabeus, with about 9 others, withdrew into the desert, so as not to share in the defilement. He kept himself and those with him alive in the mountains, as do wild animals, by continually eating food that grew wild. Not long afterward, the king sent an Athenian senator to compel the Jews to leave behind the laws of their fathers, and not to live by the laws of God. He also insisted they pollute the temple in Jerusalem by calling it the temple of Olympian Zeus, and to call the one in Gerizim the temple of Zeus the Hospitable, as did the people who lived at one time in that place. The intensity of evil was hard to deal with and extremely hateful, for the temple was filled with debauchery and reveling by the Gentiles, who relaxed with friends and had intercourse with women within the sacred precincts, and still further brought unfitting things inside. The altar was filled with disgusting things, forbidden by the laws. A man could neither keep the Sabbath, nor observe the feasts of his fathers, nor simply confess himself to be a Jew. When the month came for the king's birthday, the Jews were led by bitter constraint to partake of the sacrifices, and when the feast of Dionysius came, they were forced to walk in procession for Dionysius, wearing ivy wreaths. Moreover, a decree laid down by Ptolemy was sent to the nearby Greek cities that the same manner of conduct be imposed on the Jews to partake of the sacrifices, but they should slaughter those who chose not to change over to Greek customs. One could see, therefore, their present misery. For instance, there were 2 women brought for circumcising their children. They publicly paraded these women around the city and their babes hanging from their breasts, while they threw them down from the city wall. Others, who came together in the nearby caves to keep the 7th day secretly, were betrayed to Philip and were all burned together, because they piously kept themselves from crying out for help on account of their regard for the most holy day. Now I urge those who read this book not to be discouraged by these calamities, but to recognize that these punishments were for the discipline of our people, but not for their destruction. For it is an act of great kindness for the Lord not to allow our people to act ungodly for long, but to punish them immediately. But the Lord does not act the same way with other nations. He waits patiently until they attain the completion of their sins, then punishes them. Thus he does not judge us in this way, so as to take vengeance on us afterwards, when we have reached the end of our sinning. For this very reason, he never withdraws his mercy from us. Although he disciplines us with calamities, he does not abandon his people. Let what I have said serve as a reminder, but we must continue the narrative. That reminds me of Hebrews, where St. Paul says that those who are chastised are truly those who are the children of God. Which is, again, I wouldn't have seen that link if not for reading this, so I'm very grateful. Okay, let's continue. Eleazar, one of the scribes in high position, a man already advanced in years and of a noble presence, was forced to open his mouth to eat swine's flesh. But welcoming an honorable death rather than a defiled life, he spat out the flesh and approached the rack of his own accord. He did as men should do, who refuse what is not lawful to eat, even for the love of life. Those in charge of the unlawful sacrifice, because of their long-time acquaintance with him, took the men aside privately and urged him to bring meat proper for him to use, pretending to prepare it for himself, as though he were eating the flesh of the sacrifice commanded by the king. Thus, by doing this, he might be saved from death and be treated kindly on account of his long friendship with them. But making an honorable resolve, worthy of his years and the dignity of his old age and grey hair, which he had reached through the distinction of his excellent life even from childhood, and moreover according to the holy God-given laws, he turned himself over to them quickly, telling them to send him immediately to Hades. For to pretend such things, he said, is not worthy of our time of life, lest many of the young should suppose that Eleazar, in his 19th year, has gone over to the foreign religion. And because of my pretense, for the sake of living a brief moment longer, they should be led astray through me, while I earn only pollution and defilement in my old age. For even if for the present I should avoid the punishment of men, yet whether I live or die, I shall not escape the hand of the Almighty. Therefore, by manfully giving up my life now, I will show myself worthy of my old age, and leave to the young a noble example of how to die a good death willingly and bravely for the venerable and holy laws. After he said this, he went straight to the rack, and those who had just demonstrated goodwill towards him now showed hostility, because they took the words he had spoken to be madness. When he was about to die from the blows, he groaned and said, "It is evident to the Lord in his holy knowledge that though I could have been saved from death, I am enduring terrible sufferings in my body from this beating, but in my soul I gladly suffer these things, because I fear him." So in this manner he died, leaving in his death an example of his noble character, and the memorial of his virtue, not only to the young, but to the many people of his nation. Oh. Let me take a quick break here. Top of chapter 7. All right. It came about also that 7 brothers with their mother were arrested and forced by the king to be bound and tortured with whips and cords until they partook of the unlawful swine's flesh. One of them, acting as spokesman, said, "What do you intend to ask and learn from us? For we are ready to die rather than transgress the laws of our fathers." The king became enraged and commanded that pans and cauldrons be heated. These were heated immediately, and he commanded them to cut out the spokesman's tongue and to scalp him and cut off his hands and feet, while the rest of the brothers and the mother watched. While he was utterly helpless, the king ordered them to take him to the fire while he was still breathing and to fry him in a pan. As the smoke from the pan spread out broadly, the brothers and their mother encouraged one another to die bravely, saying, "The Lord God is taking notice of us, and in truth is encouraging us," as Moses proclaimed in his song which he sang, bearing witness against the people to their faces. And God will have compassion on his servants. After the first brother died in this manner, they brought forward the second for their sport. They tore away the skin of his head with the hair, and asked him, "Will you eat pork rather than have your body punished limb by limb?" But he replied in the language of his fathers, and said to them, "No." Therefore this brother in turn underwent the same torture as the first. So when he was at his last breath, he said, "You accursed wretch! You set us free from this present life, but the King of the world will raise us to an everlasting renewal of life, because we die for his laws." After him, the third fell prey to their sport. When it was demanded, he quickly put out his tongue and courageously stretched forth his hands and said, bravely, "I receive these from heaven, and because of his laws I disregard them, and from him I hope to get them back again." As a result, the king himself and those with him were astonished at the young man's spirit, for he regarded his sufferings as nothing. Anesti Christos. John Mark. Christos Anesti. Truly, indeed, he is risen. Verse 13. When he died, they tortured and tormented the fourth in the same way. So when he was near death, he said, "One may be chosen to die at the hands of men, and to look for the hope that God gives of being raised again by him. But for you, there shall be no resurrection to life." Next, they led forward the fifth and tormented him. But he looked at the king and said, "Because you have authority among men, mortal though you are, you do what you please. But do not think that God has forsaken our people. Continue and behold how his mighty power will torture you and your seed." After him, they led forward the sixth. When he was about to die, he said, "Do not deceive yourself, for we are suffering these things on our own account because of our sins against our own God. Therefore, things worthy of wonder have happened. But do not think that you shall be innocent for trying to fight against God." The mother was especially admirable and worthy of good memory. Though she saw her 7 sons perish in the span of a single day, she bore it courageously because of her hope in the Lord. She encouraged each of them in the language of their fathers. Filled with a noble spirit, she stirred her womanly reasoning with manly courage, saying to them, "I do not know how you came into being in my womb. It was not I who gave you breath and life, nor I who arranged in order the elements within each of you. Therefore, the Creator of the world, who formed man in the beginning and devised the origin of all things, will give both breath and life back to you again in his mercy, since you now disregard yourselves for the sake of his laws." Amen. I'm doing good, Anguro. Hope I didn't butcher your name. Hope you're doing well too. Antiochus supposed that he was being treated with contempt and suspected her speech was insulting him personally. Thus, since the youngest brother was still alive, not only did he appeal to him in words, but at the same time guaranteed him with oaths that he would make him rich and enviable if he would turn away from his fathers, and that he would consider him a friend and entrust him with public affairs. But when the young man refused to pay any attention to him, the king called his mother to him and urged her to advise the boy to save himself. After much urging from him, she agreed to persuade her son. But she leaned close to him and mocked the cruel tyrant, speaking in their native tongue, saying, "My son, have mercy on me. I carried you for 9 months in my womb and nursed you for 3 years. I reared you and brought you up to this point in your life and have taken care of you. I beseech you, my child, to look at heaven and earth and see everything in them, and know that God made them out of nothing. So also he made the race of man in this way. Do not fear this executioner, but be worthy of your brothers and accept death, that in God's mercy I may receive you back again with your brothers." Wow. While she continued speaking, the young man said to the king, "What are you waiting for? I will not obey the king's command, but I obey the command of the law given to our fathers through Moses. But you, who have invented all manner of evil against the Hebrews, will not escape the hands of God, for we are suffering because of our own sins. So if for the sake of reproof and discipline, our living Lord is angry for a little while, he will again be reconciled with his own servants. But you, O unholy man, and most defiled of all men, do not be elated in vain and puffed up by uncertain hopes when you raise your hand against the children of heaven. You have not yet escaped the judgment of the Almighty, all-seeing God. For now, our brothers have endured a brief suffering and then passed on into everlasting life under God's covenant. But you, by God's judgment, will receive just punishment for your haughtiness. Like my brothers, I give up body and soul for the laws of our fathers, crying out to God that he may soon show his mercy to our nation, and by afflictions and calamities make you confess that he alone is God, and through my brothers and me bring to an end the wrath of the Almighty which has justly come upon our entire nation. Then the king became bitterly enraged at his contempt and treated him worse than the others. So putting his trust completely in the Lord, he died in his innocence. Last of all, the mother died after her sons. Let this be enough then about the eating of sacrifices and the extreme tortures.
I see your question, Anguyo. I was a Protestant, been to Church of England, Baptist, Pentecostal, kind of all over the patch. And I converted for a whole load of reasons, which are in my video, so you're more than welcome to go and check. I've tried to make it almost story-like so you can figure it out as it goes. Right, chapter 8. But Judas, also called Maccabees, and those with him secretly infiltrated the villages and summoned their kinsmen. They called together those who had continued in the Jewish religion and took them as companions. So they gathered about 6,000 men. They invoked the Lord to look upon the people who were trampled underfoot by all, to have compassion on the temple, which had been profaned by ungodly men, to have mercy on the city, which was being destroyed and was about to be leveled to the ground, and to hearken to the blood that cried out to him. They also invoked him to remember the lawless destruction of the sinless babies and the blasphemies committed against his name, and to show his hatred of evil. As soon as Maccabees had his army in order, he was not to be withstood by the Gentiles, for the wrath of the Lord had turned to mercy. He came without notice to towns and villages and set them on fire. At opportune times, he regained places and put to flight not a few of the enemy. He found the night the best time for such hostilities. So talk of his manliness spread everywhere. When Philip realized that Judas was making progress little by little, and that he was advancing with more frequent efficiency, he wrote to Ptolemy, the governor of Coele-Syria and Phoenicia, for aid to the king's government. And Ptolemy quickly appointed Nicanor, the son of Patroclus, the foremost of his friends. He sent him in command of no fewer than 20,000 Gentiles of all nations to get rid of all the people of Judea. He sent Gorgias with him, a general and a man experienced in the affairs of war. Nicanor determined to make up for the king and the taxes due to the Romans, 2,000 talents from the capture of the Jews. He immediately sent word to the cities by the sea, inviting them to buy Jewish slaves and promising to hand over 90 slaves for a talent, not expecting that the judgment of the Almighty was about to fall upon him. Now word came to Judas concerning Nicanor's impending attack, and when he told those with him about the arrival of the army, those who were cowardly and distrustful of God's justice ran off and removed themselves from that place. Others sold all their remaining property and at the same time entreated the Lord to rescue those sold by the ungodly Nicanor before he even met them.
They entreated him, not for their own sake, but for the sake of the covenants made with their fathers, and because they were called by his holy and magnificent name. But Maccabeus gathered those around him, 6,000 in number, and exhorted them neither to be panic-stricken by the enemy, nor to fear the great multitude of the Gentiles, who were unjustly coming against them, but to contend bravely. He also exhorted them to keep before their eyes the lawless outrage committed against the holy place by the Gentiles, and the torture of the mocked city, and still more the dissolution of their ancestral way of life. For they trust in arms and bold acts, he said, but we trust in Almighty God, who with only one nod is able to overthrow both those who come against us and the entire world. He also spoke to them of the times help came to their forefathers, how the 185,000 perished under Sennacherib, and how in the time when the battle took place in Babylonia against the Galatians, 8,000 in all entered the fray, along with 4,000 Macedonians. But when the Macedonians were perplexed, the 8,000 destroyed the 120,000 because of the help that came to them from heaven. Then they took many spoils. With these words, he gave them good courage and prepared them to die on behalf of their laws and their homeland. Then he divided his forces into 4 parts. He appointed his brothers, Simon and Joseph and Jonathan, each to command a division, putting 1,500 soldiers under each. In addition, he appointed Eleazar to read aloud the holy book and gave the watchword, the help of God. Then he led the first division himself and joined battle with Nicanor. When the Almighty became their ally, they slew more than 9,000 of the enemy, and wounded and crippled most of Nicanor's army, and forced them all to flee. They seized the money of those who came to buy them as slaves. After they pursued them for some distance, they were compelled to return. Because of the hour, for they did not continue their pursuit, because it was the day before the Sabbath. So when they had collected their arms and stripped the spoils from their enemy, they kept the Sabbath, greatly blessing and giving thanks to the Lord, who had brought them safely through the day, and appointed it for them as a beginning of mercy. Then after the Sabbath, they gave a portion of the spoils to those who were tortured and to the widows and orphans, and distributed the rest among themselves and their children. When they had done this, they made a common supplication and besought the merciful Lord to be reconciled at last with his servants. Moreover, of the forces on the side of Timothy and Bacchides, who contended against them, they killed more than 20,000 of them, and became the masters of exceedingly high fortresses. They divided a great many spoils, giving shares equal to their own, to those who had been tortured, and to the orphans and widows, and also to the aged. After they collected the enemy's weapons, they organized them all carefully in convenient places, and carried the rest of the spoils to Jerusalem. They killed the commander of Timothy's forces, a most unholy man, and one who had greatly troubled the Jews. While they were celebrating the victory in the city of their fathers, they burned those who had set fire to the temple gates, Callisthenes, and some others who had fled into one small house. So they received a recompense worthy of their impiety. The thrice sinful Nicanor had brought the 1,000 merchants for the purchase of the Jews, but he was humbled with the help of the Lord by the opponents. he regarded as of the least account. Thus, after he succeeded primarily in the destruction of his own army, he took off his glorious military apparel and made his way inland alone like a fugitive until he reached Antioch. There he had undertaken to establish taxes for the Romans by the capture of the people of Jerusalem, proclaimed that the Jews had a defender and therefore were invulnerable because they followed the laws appointed beforehand by him. Whew. Oh, whoops. Throat definitely gets dry as you read. All right, chapter 9. About that time, it happened that Antiochus returned in dishonor from the region of Persia. For he had entered the city called Persepolis and attempted to rob the temples and control the city. Therefore, when the citizens rushed to the city's aid with arms, Antiochus and his men were routed. And it came about that Antiochus was put to flight by the citizens and made a shameful return home. Now, while he was back in Ecbatana, news came to him about what had happened to Nicanor and the forces of Timothy. Swollen with rage, he supposed that he would also vent upon the Jews the evil done to him by those who had banished him. Wherefore he commanded his charioteer to drive without stopping to complete the journey. But the judgment of heaven came upon him, for in his arrogance he said, "When I arrive there, I will make Jerusalem a common burial place of the Jews." But the all-seeing Lord, the God of Israel, struck him with an incurable and unseen plague. For as soon as he stopped speaking, a deadly pain seized him in his inward parts, with sharp internal torments, and this very justly, for he had tortured the inward parts of others with many and unusual afflictions. Yet by no means did he cease from his haughtiness, but was even more filled with arrogance, breathing fire in his rage against the Jews, and giving orders to hasten the journey. So it came to pass that he fell out of his chariot as it rushed along, and the fall was so hard that it tortured every limb of his body. He who had just been thinking that he could command the waves of the sea because of his superhuman arrogance, and imagined he could weigh the high mountain in a balance, was brought down to earth and carried in a litter. Thus he conveyed plainly to all the manifest power of God. Accordingly, worms swarmed up from the ungodly man's body, and his flesh rotted away while he was still alive, anguishing and in pain. Because of his odor, the whole army was repulsed by his rottenness, and because of his intolerable smell, no one was able to carry the man who a little while before thought he could touch the stars of heaven. Then he was broken down and began to cease from much of his arrogance, and to come to a recognition of the divine scourge, for he was bent over the pain at every moment. For he was bent over with pain at every moment. When he could no longer endure his own stench, he spoke these words: "It is right to be subject to God, and no mortal should think that he is equal with God." Then this disgusting man prayed to the Lord. That's funny. Then this disgusting man prayed to the Lord, who would no longer have mercy on him, saying that the holy city, which he had been hastening to level to the ground and make into a common burial place, he was now proclaiming to be free. Moreover, the Jews whom he did not consider worthy of a burial place, but to be thrown out along with their children for the wild animals and the birds to eat, he would make them all equal citizens of Athens. Furthermore, the holy temple, which he had plundered in times past, he would adorn with the finest offerings, and restore many times over all the holy vessels, and the taxes assigned to the sacrifices he would pay from his own revenues. In addition to this, he also would become a Jew and visit every inhabited place to proclaim the might of God.
Wow. Yinka, that guy. Wow. Thank you very much, bro. All right, verse 18. But when his sufferings did not cease at all for the judgment of God, came upon him justly, he was driven to despair over what had happened to him. Thus he wrote the Jews the letter recorded below in the form of a supplication. It contained the following words: To the good Jewish citizens, Antiochus your king and general sends many greetings and good wishes for your health and welfare. If you and your children are strong and your interests are served, then I am glad. With my hope in heaven, I kindly remember your respect and goodwill. Now, as I was returning home from the region of Persia, I was struck with a difficult illness, and now consider it necessary to be concerned about the common safety of all. But I am not giving up hope for myself, for I have great hope of escaping from this illness. Nevertheless, I observed that even my father, when he had led his army into the upper countries, appointed his successor, that if anything unexpected should arise, or any unwelcome news should come, the people throughout the realm would not be troubled, for they would know to whom the government was left. In addition to this, I understand how the rulers, close at hand, and the neighbors of my kingdom, keep watch for opportunities and waiting to see how things will turn out. Thus, I have appointed my son Antiochus to be king. Oftentimes, when I hastened off to the upper provinces, I entrusted and commended him to most of you. So I have written to him what is written here. Therefore, I urge you and request that you remember my acts of kindness for both the common and private good, and maintain your present goodwill towards me and my son. For I am persuaded that he, following my policy, will treat you kindly and considerately. So the murderer and blasphemer suffered very grievously, as he had treated others, for he died a miserable death in the mountains of a foreign land. Then Philip, who grew up with him, took his body home. But fearing the son of Antiochus, he went instead to Ptolemy Philometor in Egypt. Chapter 10. With the Lord leading them on, Maccabees and those with him received back the temple and the city. With the Lord leading them on, Maccabees and those with him received back the temple and the city. They took down the altars fabricated in the marketplace by the foreigners, and also destroyed the sacred precincts. When they had purified the temple, they made another altar, and striking fire out of stones, they offered sacrifices, the first in 2 years. They offered incense and lit lamps and set out the bread of the presence. When they had done this, they fell prostrate and besought the Lord so as never again to fall into such calamities. But if they should ever sin, they might be chastised by him with gentleness and not be handed over to blasphemous and barbarous nations. It happened on the anniversary of the same day
the temple was profaned by the foreigners, that the purification of the temple took place on the 25th day of the same month, which was Chislev. They celebrated it for 8 days with rejoicing in the manner of the Feast of Tabernacles, remembering how a short time before they had spent the feast living in mountains and caves like wild animals. Therefore, carrying ivy-wreathed wands, beautiful olive branches, and even palm branches, they offered hymns of praise to Him who made possible the purifying of His own place. They decreed by a common edict and vote that the whole Jewish nation should celebrate these days every year. Such then was the end of Antiochus, called Epiphanes. Now we will tell what took place under Antiochus Eupator, the son of that ungodly man, and will set forth and encompass briefly the calamities of the wars. For this man inherited the kingdom and appointed a certain Lysias as chief governor of Coele-Syria and Phoenicia. Then Ptolemy, called Macron, led the way in protecting the rights of the Jews because of the wrongdoing that happened to them, and he attempted to maintain peaceful relations with them. For this reason, he was accused before Eupator by the king's friends. He heard himself called a traitor at every turn because he abandoned Cyprus, entrusted to him by Philometor, and defected to Antiochus Epiphanes. Since he could not exercise his noble authority honorably, he took poison and ended his life. When Gorgias became governor of the region, he maintained mercenary troops and attacked the Jews at every turn. At the same time, the Idumeans, in possession of vital strongholds, were harassing the Jews. They received fugitives from Jerusalem and endeavored to keep up the war. But Maccabeus and his men made supplication and implored God to be their ally, then rushed against the strongholds of the Idumeans. They attacked them aggressively, gained possession of the places, and drove back all who fought upon the wall. They slaughtered everyone they encountered, killing no fewer than 20,000. But at least 9,000 fled into 2 very strong towers, which were well equipped, containing everything necessary to withstand a siege. So Maccabeus left behind Simon, Joseph, and also Zacchaeus, and those with him, a force sufficient to besiege them. Then he went to more urgent places. But those around Simon, who were money lovers, were bribed by some of those in the towers. When they had received 20,000 drachmas, they allowed some of them to slip away. When news of what happened reached Maccabeus, he gathered the leaders of the people and accused them of selling their brothers for money by releasing their enemies to fight against them. Then he killed these men who had become traitors and immediately seized the 2 towers. Faring well at arms in everything he undertook, he destroyed more than 20,000 in the 2 fortresses. Wow. Now Timothy, who had been defeated previously by the Jews, gathered a very massive and powerful force of mercenaries and assembled cavalry from Asia in no small number. Then he arrived as though he would take Judea captive. As he drew near, Maccabeus and his men made supplication to God as they sprinkled earth on their heads and girded their loins with sackcloth. They fell prostrate before the foot of the altar and implored him to be merciful to them, and to be an enemy to their enemies, and an adversary to their adversaries, as the law plainly shows. Then, arising from prayer, they took up their weapons and advanced a considerable distance from the city. When they came near the enemy, they were by themselves. But as dawn was breaking, the armies attacked one another. The one had the guarantee of prosperity and victory with their virtue, and the Lord as their place of refuge, but the other depended on rage as their leader in the fight. When the battle was strongly contested, there appeared to the enemy from heaven 5 majestic men on horses with golden bridles, and they were leading the Jews. They took Maccabees between them and shielded him with their own armor. They kept him from being wounded and cast arrows and thunderbolts on the enemy. Wherefore, confused with blindness and full of disorder, they were cut to pieces. 20,500 were slaughtered, along with 600 cavalry. Timothy himself fled to a stronghold called Gazara, especially well garrisoned, where Chaereas was commander. Maccabees and his men eagerly besieged the stronghold for 4 days, but the men within it trusted in the security of the place. So they kept blaspheming beyond measure and uttering disgusting words. Now when the 5th day dawned, 20 young men in the army of Maccabees burned with anger because of the blasphemies. So they bravely attacked the wall and with savage fury struck down everyone they encountered. Others likewise went up during the distraction against those inside and burned down the towers. They kindled fires and burned the blasphemers alive. Others broke through the gates, let in the rest of the force, and took control of the city. They killed Timothy, who was hiding in a well, and his brother Chaereas, and Apolophanes. When they had done this, they blessed the Lord with hymns and praises, thanking him who shows great kindness to Israel and gives them victory. All right, chapter 11. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all the good stuff. All right, let's get it. It's chapter 11. Shortly afterwards, Lysias, who was the king's guardian and kinsman and in charge of the government, was greatly upset at what had happened and gathered about 80,000 infantry and all his cavalry to come against the Jews. He purposed to make the city a home for Greeks, to levy taxes on the temple, as he did on the sacred places of the other nations, and to put the high priesthood up for sale every year. He took no account at all of God's power, but was elated with his countless thousands of infantry, and his thousands of cavalry, plus his 80 elephants. Thus he entered Judea and drew near Bethzor, a fortified place about 20 miles from Jerusalem, and besieged it. When Maccabees and his men heard of this, that Lysias was besieging the strongholds, they and all the people begged the Lord with lamentations and tears to send a good angel to save Israel. Maccabees himself was the first to bear arms, and he pleaded with the others to join with him in risking their lives to go help their brothers. Then they eagerly set out together. But in that place, while they were still near Jerusalem, a horseman appeared before them, clothed in white and brandishing a full armor of gold. Then together they all blessed the merciful God and were strengthened in heart, ready to bring damage not only on humans, but on the most savage of beasts or walls of iron. Because the Lord had mercy on them, they advanced with their weapons, having with them their ally from heaven. They hurled themselves against the enemy like lions and overthrew 11,000 of them, as well as 1,600 cavalry, and forced all of them to flee. Most of them escaped, wounded and naked, and Lysias himself escaped by a disgraceful flight. But as Lysias was not lacking in intelligence, he discussed the loss that had happened to him. He realized the Hebrews were unconquerable because the Almighty God was their ally. So he sent a message and persuaded them to settle everything on just terms. Moreover, perhaps he could also persuade the king and compel him to become their friend. Then Maccabees agreed to everything Lysias urged, since he was concerned about what was best for all. For whatever Maccabees gave to Lysias in writing concerning the Jews, the king granted. 4 letters were written to the Jews from Lysias, encompassing the following. Lysias to the people of the Jews, greetings. John and Absalom, who were sent by you, have given us your signed communication and asked about the matters addressed in it. Accordingly, I reported to the king whatever was necessary to bring him, and he granted whatever was possible. If you will keep your goodwill toward the government, I will try in the future to promote your welfare. So in behalf of these things and their details, I have ordered that these men and my representatives confer with you. Farewell. The 148th year, the 24th of Dioscorinthius. Now the king's letters contain the following. King Antiochus to Lysias his brother, greetings. Since our father has departed to the gods, we desire the subjects of the kingdom be undisturbed in caring for their own affairs. We understand the Jews do not approve of our father's change to Greek customs, but choose their own way of life and ask that their customs be granted them. Since therefore we prefer for this nation to be free from disturbance, our decision is for their temple to be returned to them, and for them to live according to the customs of their forefathers. Therefore, you will do well to send word to them and give them assurances of friendship, so they may know our policy. Be in good spirits, and continue gladly to help them in their own affairs. The king's letter to the nation was as follows. King Antiochus to the Jewish Senate and the rest of the Jews, greetings. If you are healthy, this would be as we desire. We are also in good health. Menelaus has told us you wish to return home and attend to your own affairs. Therefore, those who return home by the 30th of Xanthicus will have our pledge of friendship, with freedom from fear, for the Jews to enjoy their own food and laws as before, and none of them shall be troubled in any way for things done in ignorance. I have also sent Menelaus to encourage you. Farewell, the 148th year, the 15th of Xanthicus. The Romans also sent a letter, which read as follows. Quintus Memmius and Titus Manius, legates of the Romans, to the people of the Jews, greetings. We also approve of those things concerning which Lysias, the kinsman of the king, has granted you. But the matters he decided to report to the king, as soon as you have considered these things, send someone promptly, that we may explain what is suitable for you, for we are on our way to Antioch. For this reason, make haste, and send someone to let us know your intentions. Farewell. the 148th year, the 15th of Xanthicus. Take another drink. Chapter 12. When these agreements had been made, Lysias returned to the king, and the Jews went back to their farming. But some of the governors of various locales, Timothy and Apollonius, son of Genneus, as well as Hieronymus and Demephon, and in addition Nicanor, the commander of the Cyprians, would not allow the Jews to enjoy tranquility and live in peace. Then the people of Joppa did so great an ungodly deed as this. They invited the Jews who lived among them, together with their wives and children, to embark on ships equipped for seas, as though they harbored no ill will toward them. Now this was done by the common vote of the city. But when the Jews welcomed this, wishing to live in peace and suspecting nothing, the men of Joppa took them out to sea and drowned at least 200 of them. When Judas learned of the cruelty visited on his countrymen, he summoned his men. So when he had called upon God, the righteous judge, he attacked the murderers of his brothers. He set the harbor on fire by night, burned the ships, and put to the sword those who fled there. But since the gates of the city were closed, he departed, intending to come again and root out the whole community of Joppa. However, when he learned that the people in Jamnia intended to wipe out the Jews, who were living among them in the same way, he attacked the Jamnian people by night and set the harbor and the fleet on fire. Therefore, the glow of the light was visible as far as Jerusalem, 30 miles away. When they had gone about a mile from there on their march against Timothy, Arabs attacked him with no less than 5,000 infantry and 500 cavalry. After a strongly contested battle, Judas and his men, with God's help, were successful. The defeated nomads pleaded with Judas to grant them pledges of friendship. They promised to give him livestock and to benefit them in other ways. So Judas, supposing they could indeed be useful in varied ways, agreed to make peace with them. Then, after he accepted their pledges, they returned to their tents. He also attacked a certain town named Caspian, strongly fortified with earthworks and walls, and inhabited by a mixed population of Gentiles. Those within it trusted in the security of the walls and their supply of provisions. They behaved very contemptuously towards Jesus and his men, insulting them and even blaspheming and saying unlawful things. But Judas and his men called upon the great Lord of the world, who overthrew Jericho without battering rams or engines of war in the times of Joshua. Then Judas and his men assaulted the walls. They overpowered the city by the will of God and inflicted such indescribable slaughter that the adjoining lake, a quarter of a mile wide, seemed to be filled with blood. From there, they went 95 miles and continued on to Charax, to the Jews who were called Tubiani. They did not overtake Timothy in that region, for by then he had departed from there without accomplishing anything, but in one place Timothy left a very strong garrison. Athanasius and Sosipater, who were commanders under Maccabees, marched out and crushed those men Timothy left in the stronghold, over 10,000 soldiers. But Maccabees organized his army in divisions, setting men in command of the divisions, and hastened after Timothy, who had with him 120,000 infantry and 2,500 cavalry. When Timothy learned of the approach of Judas, he sent the women and the children ahead with the baggage to a place called Carnaim, for that place was hard to attack and difficult to access because of the narrowness of all its places. But when Judas's first division appeared, alarm and fear came over the enemy at the manifestation to them of him who sees all things. They ran off in flight, rushing headlong in every direction, so as to be often hurt by their own men and stabbed by the points of their own swords. Judas pursued them with great vigor, piercing the sinful men with the sword and killing as many as 30,000 of them. Timothy himself fell into the hands of Athanasius and Sosipater and their soldiers. With great trickery, he pleaded with them to let him go safely, because he held the parents of most of them and some of their brothers, to whom no regard would be shown. So when with many words he had confirmed his solemn promise to restore them unharmed, they released him for the sake of rescuing their brothers. Then Judas marched with Carnaim and the temple of Atargatis and destroyed 20,000 people. After the rout and slaughter of these, he also marched on Ephron, a fortified town where Lysias lived with countless people of all nations. Strong young men were set as guards before the walls and fought mightily. Many provisions of war engines and missiles were stored there. But the Jews called upon the Lord, who with power crushes the strength of his enemies. Thus they took possession of the city and killed as many as 25,000 of those within it. Moving away from Ephron, they hurried on to Scythopolis, 75 miles from Jerusalem. But when the Jews who lived there testified to the good will the people of Scythopolis had shown them, and their civilized treatment of them in times of trouble, they thanked them and encouraged them also to be favorable to the Jewish race in the future. Then Judas and his men arrived at Jerusalem, the Feast of Weeks being close at hand. After this feast, also called Pentecost, they marched against Gorgias, the governor of Idumea. He came out against them with 3,000 infantry and 400 cavalry. After they engaged in battle, it happened that a few of the Jews were killed. But a certain Athanasius, one of Bacenor's men, a man on horseback and a strong man, grabbed hold of Gorgias. He took hold of his cloak and was dragging him off by sheer strength. He intended to take the accursed man alive, but one of the Thracian cavalry chased him down and severed his arm. So Gorgias fled to Marisa. Now Esdras and his men had been fighting for a long while and were tired. So Judas called on the Lord to show himself as their ally and leader in battle. They began to sound the battle cry in the language of their forefathers and sang hymns. Then he charged against the troops of Gorgias when they least expected it and set them to flight. Then Judas retrieved his army and entered the city of Adullam. As the 7th day was dawning, they purified themselves according to the custom and spent the Sabbath there. The following day, as was now necessary, Judas and his men left to gather up the bodies of those killed in battle, to bring them back to rest with their kindred in the tombs of their forefathers. But under the tunics of each of the dead, they uncovered sacred tokens of the Jamnian idols, which the Jews are forbidden by law to wear. So the reason these men died in battle became clear to everyone. Thus they all blessed the ways of the Lord, the righteous judge, who reveals the hidden things. They turned to supplication and prayed that the sin they had committed might be completely blotted out. The noble Judas exhorted his people to guard themselves from sin, for with their own eyes they had seen what happened to those who died in battle because of their sin. He then took up an offering from his soldiers amounting to 2,000 silver drachmas and sent it to Jerusalem to present as a sin offering. In doing so, he acted properly and with honor, taking note of the resurrection. For if he were not looking for the resurrection of those fallen, it would have been utterly foolish to pray for the departed. But since he was looking to the reward of splendor laid up for those who repose in godliness, it was a holy and godly purpose. Thus he made atonement for the fallen, so as to set them free from their transgression.
Wow, thank you very much, Joe. Really appreciate that. Yeah, that is the very section that I'd heard a lot before actually reading this. Proof and the evidence for prayers for the dead, which is, again, amazing to see. Right, so chapter 13. In the 149th year, Judas and his men got word that Antiochus Eupator was marching against Judea with a huge army, and with him his guardian Lysias, who was in charge of the government. Each of them had a Greek army of 110,000 infantry, 5,300 horsemen, 22 elephants, and 300 chariots, armed with scythes. Menelaus also joined forces with them. It was a great irony that he encouraged Antiochus, not for the preservation of his homeland, but for his expectation to be established in authority. But the King of Kings aroused anger in Antiochus against this sinful man. So when Lysias pointed out that this man was the cause of all the trouble, he commanded them to take him to Beroa, to put him to death, as was the custom there. For there is a tower in that place, 50 cubits high and filled with ashes. It also has a contrivance continuing around it on all sides that inclines steeply into the ashes. There they all shove anyone guilty of sacrilege or who has done excessive evils to their destruction. Thus it happened that Menelaus the lawbreaker died by such a destiny. He was even deprived of a burial in the ground. Now this was altogether just, for since he committed many sins against the sacred altar, whose fire and ashes were holy, he should get death for himself in ashes. The king was coming with barbarous arrogance to face the Jews with things far worse than anything done by his father. But when Judas learned of this, he charged the people to call upon the Lord day and night, asking him to help them now as he had formerly, for they were about to be deprived of their law, their homeland, and their temple. They prayed he would not allow the people who had just begun a new life to fall into the hands of the blaspheming Gentiles. After, they all made the same petition together and constantly implored the merciful Lord with weeping, fasting, and prostrations for 3 days,
Judas encouraged them and commanded them to stand firm. Then he consulted privately with the elders and determined to march out to let the matter be decided by the help of God before the king's army could enter Judea and take possession of the city. So, committing the results to the Creator of all, and urging those with him to fight nobly to the death for the laws, the temple, the city, the country, and the commonwealth, he positioned his army near Modane. After he gave his men the watchword, God's victory, and chose his best young men, he besieged the royal palace by night, killing as many as 2,000 men in the camp. He also slew the leading elephant and its rider. As a result, they filled the camp with their terror and disorder and departed victoriously. This all happened by daybreak because the protection of the Lord was with him. Thus the king tasted the courage of the Jews and plotted a strategy against their positions. He marched against Bethzor, a stronghold of the Jews, but was turned back. He attacked again, but was beaten. Judas then sent supplies to the men inside the fortress. But Rhodocus, a man from the Jewish army, tipped off the enemy with secret information. Thus he was sought after, caught, and imprisoned. The king spoke a second time with the people in Bethzor, gave assurances, received their pledges, and departed. He then attacked Judas and his forces, but was vanquished. He then learned that Philip, whom he had left in charge of the government in Antioch, had lost his sanity. He was disheartened and summoned the Jews, and yielded and gave an oath to honor all their rights. Thus he settled with them and offered sacrifice, respected the temple, and treated the place humanely. He welcomed Maccabees and Hegemonides. And Hegemonides was left as governor from Ptolemais to Gera. Then he went to Ptolemais, but the people of Ptolemais were indignant over the treaty with the Jews. In fact, they were so enraged, they sought to annul its provisions. But Lysias took the public stage and defended the treaty as best he could. He did persuade them, and gaining their goodwill, he returned to Antioch. This is the outcome of the king's strategy and settlement. Just take another swig. Oh boy. Chapter 14. After 3 years' time, word reached Judas and his soldiers that Demetrius, the son of Seleucus, had killed Antiochus and Lysias his guardian, then had sailed into the harbour of Tripolis with a powerful army and fleet, and taken possession of the country. Now there was a certain Alcimus, formerly a high priest, who had willfully defiled himself in times of social and political disturbance. He realized there was no way for him to live in safety or to approach the holy altar ever again. So he went to King Demetrius sometime in the 151st year and presented him a crown of gold and a palm branch, as well as some of the customary olive branches from the temple. During that day he remained peaceful, but he seized an opportunity in his own stupidity when he was invited by Demetrius to a session of the council and was questioned about the disposition and intentions of the Jews. Thus he said to the council, Those of the Jews who are called Hasideans, whose leader is Judas Maccabees, or Maccabeus, are maintaining war and stirring up rebellion, and will not allow the kingdom to attain stability. Wherefore I have set aside my paternal glory, meaning my high priesthood, and now have come here. I came here first out of my honest concern for the well-being of the king, and second, out of consideration for my own fellow citizens. For through the rashness of those just mentioned, our entire nation is suffering misfortune. Because you, O king, are acquainted with the details of these things, please take care of our country and our hard-pressed people with the gracious love for mankind that you have for everyone. For as long as Judas is alive, it will be impossible for the government to experience peace. After he said this, the rest of the king's friends who bore malice against Judas aroused even greater anger in Demetrius. Immediately he chose Nicanor, the commander of a squadron of elephants, appointing him governor of Judea. He sent him off with the charge to kill Judas, scatter his soldiers, and establish Alcimus as high priest of the great temple. The Gentiles who had fled before Judas throughout Judea joined Nicanor, for they thought the setbacks and calamities of the Jews would bring prosperity to themselves. The Jews got word of Nicanor's coming and the assault of the Gentiles, so they sprinkled their heads with earth and prayed to him who establishes his people forever and always helps his own inheritance by making himself present. At the command of Judas, their leader, they immediately moved the army from there and met the enemy in battle at a village called Deso. Simon, the brother of Judas, had encountered Nicanor in battle, but was halted because of the unexpected silence of those adversaries. Nevertheless, when Nicanor heard of the bravery of Judas and his men and their courage in battle for their country, he pulled back from deciding the matter by bloodshed. So he sent forth Posidonius, I don't even know that word. So he sent forth Posidonius, Theodotus, and Mattathias to offer and receive pledges of friendship. After an extensive investigation of the terms, the leader communicated the terms to the people, and it appeared they were of one mind, and they agreed to the treaty. So they set aside a day to meet privately. From each army a chariot came forward, and seats of honor were set in place. Judas appointed battle-ready men at strategic places, lest the enemy attempt sudden trickery, but the consultation was held in a fitting way. Nicanor remained in Jerusalem and did nothing improper, but he dismissed the crowd of people that had gathered. He also kept Judas in his presence continually, for he was heartily attached to the man. He encouraged him to marry and have children. Thus, Judas got married, settled down, and lived a normal life. When Alcimus became aware of their goodwill for each other, he took the treaty that was made and went to King Demetrius. He told him Nicanor was disloyal to the government, since he had appointed Judas, the plotter against the kingdom, to be his successor. The king became enraged. Provoked by the false accusations of that depraved man, he wrote to Nicanor that he was most displeased with the treaty and ordered him to send Maccabeus as prisoner to Antioch at once. When this message reached Nicanor, he was very upset and very grieved that he had to break the agreement when the man had not done wrong. But since he could not act in opposition to the king, he watched for a strategic opportunity to carry out the command. Maccabees noticed that Nicanor was becoming more harsh in his treatment of him and more rude when they met than was customary. Judas decided Nicanor's sour behavior was not at all propitious, so he gathered up a good number of his men and hid from him. When Nicanor realized he had been boldly outmaneuvered by the man, he went to the great and holy temple and found the priests offering the customary sacrifices. He commanded them to hand him over. They declared under oath they did not know the whereabouts of the man he sought. So Nicanor stretched out his right hand toward the temple and swore this oath: "If you will not hand over Judas to me as prisoner, I will raze this shrine of God to the ground, destroy the altar, and erect at this place a splendid temple to Dionysius." After he said this, he departed. Then the priests reached out their hands to heaven, calling upon the everlasting defender of our nation, saying, "O Lord of all, while you have need of nothing, you were pleased to have a temple for your dwelling in our midst. Now then, O Holy One, O Lord of all holiness, preserve forever undefiled this house, so recently purified." Razis was one of the elders of Jerusalem and was denounced before Nicanor as a man. Sorry, I'll read this bit again. Razis was one of the elders of Jerusalem and was denounced before Nicanor as a man who loved his fellow citizens, a man held in high esteem and called a father of the Jews, because of his goodwill. For in past times, when there was isolation from the Gentiles, he was brought to judgment for practicing the Jewish religion. But with all zeal, he risked his life, body and soul for his religion. Nicanor wished to make obvious his ill will for the Jews. So he sent more than 500 soldiers to arrest Razis, for he thought that by arresting him, he would produce calamity among the Jews. Thus, when the soldiers were about to capture the tower and were forcing open the door of the courtyard, they commanded that the doors be set on fire. When Razis was surrounded, he fell upon his own sword, for he preferred to die bravely rather than fall into the hands of sinners and suffer outrages unworthy of his own noble birth. However, in the tension of the confrontation, he did not fall with exactness on his sword. As the crowd rushed through the doors, he took courage and jumped up on the wall, bravely throwing himself down into the throng. But as people quickly stepped back, there was an open space, and he landed in the midst of the empty area. He was still alive. In a blaze of anger, he stood up, and though his blood gushed like a spring, and his injuries were severe, he darted through the crowd. He climbed up on a steep rock, and with his blood completely drained out of him, he tore out his intestines, took them in both hands, and threw them at the crowd as he called on the Lord of life and spirit to return them to him again. Such was the manner of his death. Wow, that's intense. All right, chapter 15. When Nicanor learned that Judas and his men were in the province of Samaria, he decided to attack them in utter safety on their day of rest. But the Jews who were forced to accompany him said, "By no means should you so cruelly and barbarously bring destruction. Show respect for the Sabbath day, which he who sees all things has honored with holiness above other days." Then the thrice sinful man asked if there were a Lord in heaven who ordered the keeping of the Sabbath day. When they declared, "It is the living Lord himself, the ruler in heaven, who commanded the keeping of the seventh day," he responded, "I am a ruler on earth. I command you to take up your weapons and complete the king's business." Nevertheless, he was unsuccessful in carrying out his heinous plan. In his utter vanity and arrogance, Nicanor decided to put up a public monument of victory over Judas and his army. But Maccabeus never ceased to trust the Lord and fully hope that he would help him. So he encouraged his men to have no fear of any attack from the Gentiles, but to bear in mind how help had come to them from heaven in times past. Now they should anticipate the victory the Almighty would give to them. He also exhorted them out of the law and the prophets, calling to mind the battles they had won, making them more eager to fight. Then after he revived their courage, he gave his commands and at the same time emphasized the Gentiles' faithfulness and their failure to keep their oaths. So he issued each of them armor, not so much of the surety of shields and spears as with the encouragement of courageous speech. Then he inspired them all by telling about a dream, a kind of vision worthy of believing. The vision he saw was this: Onias, who had been high priest, a true gentleman of modest and noble manner, one well-spoken and from childhood formed in all that pertains to virtue, was praying with hands outstretched for the whole nation of the Jews. Then in the same manner another man appeared, distinguished by grey hair and glory, and having about him a certain astonishing and majestic preeminence. Onias then spoke, saying, "This is Jeremiah, the prophet of God, a man who loves his brothers and prays fervently for the people and the holy city." Stretching forth his right hand, Jeremiah gave a sword of gold to Judas, and as he presented it to him, he addressed him as follows: "Take this sacred sword, a gift from God, by which you will strike down your enemies." Encouraged by Judas's words, a man so good and able in stirring up virtue and courage in the souls of young men, they determined not to plan out a campaign. Instead, they would wage war bravely at once, deciding the matter with hand-to-hand combat, with all manliness, because the city, the sanctuary, and the temple were at risk. Their main concern was not first for wives and children, or even for brothers and relatives. Their greatest fear was for the consecrated temple. As for those who remained in the city, they were distressed and worried about the conflict in the open country. Everyone was now living in suspense over the outcome of the war. The enemy was nearby, their army was prepared for battle, and their elephants were strategically positioned, and the cavalry was deployed on the flanks. Maccabeus noted carefully the great masses before him, the variety of the armaments, and the savageness of the elephants. So he reached out his hands towards heaven and called on the Lord, the wonder worker, for he knew it is not by weapons alone, but by the Lord's decision that victory is won by those worthy of it. Thus he cried out to him in the following manner: "O Lord, in the time of Hezekiah, the king of Judea. You sent your angel, and he killed as many as 185,000 in the camp of Sennacherib. So now, O ruler of the heavens, send us a noble angel to go before us, spreading fear and trembling. By the strength of your arm, may those who speak blasphemy as they come against your holy ones be struck down." With these words, he completed his prayer. Nicanor and his men marched ahead with trumpets and battle songs, but Judas and his men joined the enemy in battle with invocations and prayers. They fought with their hands and prayed to God in their hearts, and struck down at least 35,000 men. So they were deeply gladdened by God's visitation. When the battle was ended and they were marching home with joy, they recognized Nicanor in full armor, lying dead. With tumultuous shouts, they blessed the Lord in the language of their fathers. Then Judas, who was in body and soul ever the chief defender of his fellow citizens, and who from youth maintained goodwill towards his countrymen, commanded them to sever Nicanor's head and arm and take them back to Jerusalem. When he arrived there, he called his countrymen together and stationed the priests before the altar. Then he sent for those in the citadel. Before them, he displayed the head of the defiled Nicanor and that slanderous man's hand, which he had boastfully stretched out against the holy house of the Almighty. He cut out the tongue of the godless Nicanor and announced he would feed it to the birds bit by bit, and hang up the rewards of his folly opposite the sanctuary. Then everyone lifted their eyes to heaven and blessed the Lord who visited them, saying, "Blessed is he who kept his own place undefiled." Judas then fastened Nicanor's head to the wall of the citadel, a visible symbol to all present of the Lord's help. So they all decreed by public vote never to allow this day to be unobserved, and to celebrate it on the 13th day of the 12th month, called Adar, in the Syrian language, the day before Mordecai's day. This is the way things turned out for Nicanor. So from that time on, the city has been controlled by the Hebrews. Thus I will end my story here. If I have written well and made my point in the narrative, this is what I myself desired. But if it was done poorly and is just average, this is the best I could do. For as it is disagreeable to drink wine only, or water only, whereas wine mingled with water is pleasing and delightful, and brings greater joy, so also the written style of the account delights the ears of those who read it. This then shall be the end. Wow. Whew. Yeah, I definitely agree. There were so many details in this. Elephants, cavalry, ripped out intestines. There's so many details in this. It was definitely enjoyable to read, that's for sure. And again, it gave me a massive appreciation for, just the apostolic teaching and doctrine when it comes to prayers for the dead and the communion of saints with Jeremiah and Ananias. I actually forgot that was in 2nd Maccabees. So yeah, very, very eye-opening to read it for myself. But yeah, thank you very much for that, Joe. Let me go through the super chats. I did not expect anything like this. Yinka, that guy, just dropping by. I'm off, but keep up the good work. God bless. Thank you so much, brother. I really, really appreciate that. For the big 50. And Joe Skill, the 13.99 Canadian. thank you, brother. Continue to share the beauty of orthodoxy. I will do my best as long as I live. That is a promise. I will do my best. Yeah, I am utterly convinced that orthodoxy is the way. It's the way of Acts. It is the way of the apostles, the way that they set forth for us all to follow. And I think ultimately it's just a case of educating those who don't know any better. But as long as the Lord gives me breath, that's what I'm going to try and do. So, with that being said, I have a lot to read up on when it comes to 2nd Maccabees, but I will enjoy doing that in my own time. So glad to have you all here, and I can't wait to get to 3rd Maccabees next time. There's so many things to do. Obviously, I want to finish off this series. Then I'm thinking of other videos that I need to get on. There's been the history of the church, which I'm hoping is part of the education that the Protestants will need. So that's there available for everyone to go and check out. And then there'll be more videos and more projects. But thank you all so much for being here. It's been a massive blessing. At 11 p.m. at night, and I got to get to bed because I got work tomorrow. So much love, everyone, and God bless. And as in all things, glory to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit, now and ever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen. Good night, everyone, and take care. I will see you in the next one. God bless.